best to keep you awake and get you out of here quick. Because there's a lot of people that are really tired. One of which I'm sure is probably napping right now as he's flying down probably somewhere over the mic. My mic not on? Is that what that is? You're not just praising Jesus? All right. Oh, is that the sign? All right. Awesome. Know the sign. I think most people is probably catching a nap somewhere over the Rockies right now, and so we don't tend to just isolate single individuals and pour accolades on. There's a lot of people that did a lot of stuff this week. Greg was up well past midnight, and the reason I know that is because he and I were telling us he was finishing production for this, and he was on a plane at 6:30 this morning. And let's just give it up for Greg. He is like the boss. So he probably won't watch this back because he doesn't care what happens. He's not. But no, I'm just kidding. No, he will. He'll watch back, and I'm glad we get a chance to acknowledge him. I know he's put a lot of work in. This was a great week. If you missed it, missed it. And hopefully next year, that reservations, take reservations now. All right, awesome. So if you're interested, right back there. Talk to her after we're done and get your name in and make sure you're part of this next year. But there were so many people, and the cool thing is this is a great picture, but there's still people beyond that were involved and engaged. There were people that couldn't make it there that were paying hard for those that were in attendance and those that were serving and those that were speaking and all those kinds of things. And it was such an amazing week of people being engaged and giving of themselves. And one of the things that I noticed this week, and I noticed it right away as we got there Wednesday afternoon and just watched all the kind of behind the scenes stuff that has to happen for everybody else kind of into camp, all set up and everything else. But one of the things I noticed right away was the doing that was happening and the serving that was happening. And if you'll let me use the phrase, the one anothering that was happening. It happened throughout those multiple days, sharing with one another, serving one another, eating with one another, laughing with one another, crying with one another, enjoying one another's presence. There was some pranking of one another. I got a little weird, but it's all good. Nobody died. That's a good thing. There was kind of lawnmower dancing with other. There was slip sliding, softballing with other. There was just all kinds of great things. Sing with one another, worshiping with one another, having fun with one another. And the thing that just really kind of came home for me is that the few days there, and I know it's kind of isolated, and we do thing. I grew up kind of going to church camp since I was a kid, and there was always this thing that we know happens, right? There's the Sunday, we're still kind of like, yeah, and then there's kind of like Sunday night, we're like, ugh, like everybody knows what's happening Monday morning, we're back to work, or we're back to whatever, but the thing is for those few moments, or those few days, we're gathered together, I feel like we kind of get right for a little while, and it doesn't mean we get perfect. We get it right. We kind of understand that, hey, all this other stuff that seems to have its claws in me isn't near as important as the people I'm surrounded by. And I can spend some time investing in them and spending time with one another, them. People doing more than just talking about loving other, right? But actually loving other. People doing more than just talking about faith with one another, but people truly living out their faith with one another. Greg did all of our production stuff. I told him, I think it was the day before, I had this idea, and it was way too late to kind of go back and shoot this video. But I'm going to show this video. I was going to follow it up with an altered video. And what it would be, it was going to be, we're going to go flashing back for all these people making their way into the dining hall and the noise and the food and all that happening, and we just edit out all the have a single person walking through the line, themselves, sitting down, eating by themselves, getting up. All the activities would be this, but they did them by themselves. And they would make their way to the tabernacle, and we record the message, and we record the lessons, but they would sit there by themselves, and the music would be there, but no people would be there, and they'd sing those songs by themselves. Let me just share with you, there's so many cool elements that were a part of camp, the activities and the food, and the lessons and the messages, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm willing to say the most significant part of that is that you shared it with one another. Just think how different it would have been if you'd have done all those same things by yourself. Not nearly the impact, not nearly the enjoyment, not nearly the fulfillment. I think there's something to othering. Did you know, or maybe you knew this, but that, and if you didn't, maybe we'll help you learn something this morning. Did you know that our faith, and Christian faith, is more than what we believe? Did you know that? We put an emphasis on what we believe, because that's a big thing, that's a first step. But our Christian faith is really, once you've taken that first step, from there on, your Christian faith is about what you do. And I want to just an example of what I'm talking about, if you don't mind, real quick. How many of you have ever seen something like that? Look close. I'll give you a few minutes. How many of you have owned something like that? That looks something like that? Yeah. So we get it. So we understand. We believe that underneath the clothing, there's a piece of equipment that can help us be healthier, right? We believe that. And I don't know that we would argue about it. We probably all on the same page believe. But there's a big difference between believing that can make me healthier, clearing all the clothes off, getting on it, and doing something about what I say I believe. And I want us to understand that as Christians, you can believe in your heart and in your head a lot of things, but until you act upon it, it's really not real faith. It's a great idea. It's something that maybe you hold on to and you're firm about, but unless you practice it, unless you live it out, it really has no influence and an impact in your life, and therefore won't have much influence or impact in the life of anybody else. Let me just share something. Throughout the New Testament, God tells us how to have a fuller, happier, healthier, more purposeful, more impactful life. Do you know that? The scriptures are just replete with God telling us, here's how life can really be full of life. Here's how life can be abundant and overjoyed and just incredible and amazing and wonderful. It doesn't mean you don't have any problems. It just means you know where to take your problems. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect, but you are in relationship with the one who is perfect. Throughout the scriptures, he tells us over and over and over again, here's the life I want for you. Jesus said, I've come to give life, not just any kind of life, but a full life. An abundant life. And I know a lot of people are like, yeah, that's awesome. One of these days when we get to heaven, that wasn't what Jesus was talking about at all. Matter of fact, he rarely talked about heaven. He talked about like kingdom of heaven, but he really talked about heaven, the location itself, very much. You know what he talked about? He talked about entering into our lives and changing our lives right here, right now, where we're at. And the reason he talks about that is that when he changes one life, it becomes contagious, and it touches other lives. But throughout the Bible, it talks about having a full, happier, healthier, more purposeful, more impactful life, and he tells us that the only way this is really going to happen is with one another. That's it. It's going to happen with one another. Any guesses as to how many one another statements are directed to believers in the New Testament? I had to Google this. I didn't read all, but any guesses? Less 75, but that's a pretty good guess. You're in the neighborhood. 59. 59 times throughout the New Testament, God tells us, and here's the cool thing, within the context of the local church, not us just individually, within the context of the local church, he tells us that we need to do something with or something for one another. 59 times. And a lot of them are repeated. Why? Because we need them repeated. Because we don't always listen real well. And it's not a little list of things that I check a box on, right? It's not, I don't go through the New Testament and go, well, let me read all the one another's. I'll start with one, and I'll just check. And when I get to 59, I guess I'm good. That's not the idea. The idea, these things, these one anothering, these things that God wants us to do for one another, with one another, are things that result as an overflow of my relationship with Jesus. Because of who he is and who he is in my life, that these things become part of my life. I just do this with, and I do this for other people. Those one others I'm surrounded by. Let me just share with you some of those things, right? Things like being devoted to one another, honoring one another. I'm just scratching the surface here, you guys. Accepting one another, instructing one another, serving one another, carrying each other's burdens, being kind and compassionate to one another, and the list goes on and on. 59 times, God says, as a local church, as people gather together, these are the things that you need to be doing with and for one another. You know what's interesting? Is you can't live out your Christian life without another. You can't one another without another. Everybody's like that. Everybody, you need caffeine to understand that. That's just, you can't one another without another, right? But somehow we have this mentality, especially in Western culture. This is really kind of a foreign idea in a lot of other cultures. But in Western culture, we believe, well, as long as me and God, as long as I study my Bible and I pray, then me and God are good. That's not true. That's biblical. Because without another, you can't do the 59 one another's that God wants us to do. Why? For a fuller, richer life. And we'll kind of land there in just a little bit. Here's the thing about all those one another's, and I've heard most of those one another's probably preached at some point in my life. I'm pretty sure. My mom likes to say I was on the pew like day two. I don't know. I don't remember it. But apparently I was in church pretty early. But I'm pretty sure I heard most of those one another's preached from a pulpit at some point. I also preached many of those myself. And I've sat where sitting and nodded my head and believed everything I heard and read. Like, I believed it. Like, yeah, we should love one another. And we should share with one another. And we should serve one another. And you know what would typically happen? I would get up from my pew, and I'd walk out the door and not really want one another in other. I believed it. It was like the exercise bike. I believed it, but I didn't carry it out. Did you know one of the primary activities of the local church is the one anothering of one another? Did you know that? One of the primary activities of the local church is the one anothering of one another. I know a lot of times we're like, what church? What we're going to evangelize, and we're going to, yeah, it's all true. But did you know that a lot of that is an overflow of how we do life and we love one another? Jesus said it himself. He said, hey, people are going to catch on to what you're about. People are going to know that you're my followers. If what? If you have great evangelism program. Nope. People are going to know you're my followers because you park at a building every Sunday morning. Nope. So people are going to know you're my disciples, you're my followers, if you love one another. So even evangelism itself has to flow from a love for one another, love for others. Here's the other part. Did you also know that very little of this one anothering happens here on Sunday mornings? Did you know that? Maybe you're like, whoa, yeah. Let me just share with you. Maybe some of you grew up in a church much like I did that looked something like this. I'd show up to a building on Sunday morning. We'd sing some songs. I'd have some school. Then we'd come back in and sing songs. And somebody would pass a plate in front of us, and we would put money in it. And then some guy would talk too long. And then we'd go home. And then I'd repeat the process Sunday night. And for good measure, we'd do it once again Wednesday night because apparently we had enough yet. We'd do it again. And I thought, as long as I do that, then me and God are good. As long as I show up every Sunday, I park in a we had pews back then. As a matter of fact, I was talking to somebody about wooden pews we used to have that had like the curve in the back that like you couldn't sit comfortably in it. What I do remember, and I was sharing, I can't remember how old I was. I joked that I was probably 14, but I think I might be a little bit younger. But I remember there was a preacher at our church one time when I was a kid, and he was really, really super loud. And we didn't have like a really tiny church, and we didn't have like audio stuff. When you got up, you had to project. This dude could project. Like he was so loud. All I can remember is that curve in the pew was just big enough to stick my head behind Mom's back in, and I could muff the sound just a little. There again, I think I was younger than 14, but it could have been. But I really thought that as long as I show up, pay some money, sing songs, then me and God are good. See, I grew up in a model that had a very, very vertical perspective on faith. It was just me and Jesus. It was just, here's my to-do list, and as long as I do it, then me and Jesus are good. And that's all it's about. It's just me and Jesus and me and Jesus. That's all we had to do. Let me share with you, that version of faith became incredibly monotonous. It became incredibly duty-filled. And if somebody grew up in that model, you're like, I love that model. I'm sorry. It's boring. Boring. Like, dear God, do we have to do this again? Why? Well, I'll show up because I want me and Jesus still good, I guess. And this is what he wants. He wants me to show up and get in the building, pay some money, sing some songs, and go home. You know what I've learned? I've learned that if faith is boring, I'm not doing it right. That's what I've learned. And it doesn't even matter what the model is. If my faith is boring, I'm not the victim in this. That's me. That's my fault. So that model wasn't necessarily wrong. I think there were some things that were really missing because it stayed really vertical. But if my faith is boring, that's because I'm not doing it right. You know what I learned? Your Christian walk and your Christian life and your Christian faith involves so much more than just you and Jesus. It just does. It involves so much more than just you and Jesus. Let me show you something really, really quick this morning in the book of Hebrews. And if you're new to the Bible or you're new to church, book of Hebrews is in the New Testament. And it's kind of squeezed between the Philemon or Philemon, however you want to say it. I like Philemon. It sounds like Caribbean. Philemon. It sounds, I like to say it. That's probably not the way you say it. But between Philemon and James, all right? So it's kind of squeezed between there. Let me just give you a quick synopsis of book of Hebrews. We don't know who wrote it. Unless you talk to people who think they know who wrote it, who try to convince you that they know who wrote it. They don't know who wrote it. Because nobody knows who wrote it. You know why we don't know who wrote it? It doesn't say who wrote the book of Hebrews. We have some ideas. We have some guesses who it might have been. But it doesn't say who wrote the book of Hebrews. It could have been a man. Probably was. Maybe was. It could have been a woman. Maybe part of the reason it doesn't have a name in it is that maybe a woman wrote it. And back in that culture, in that society, if a lady signed her name to it, a lot of times back in those days, they didn't give a lot of credibility to it or whatever. So maybe that's the reason God didn't have her put her name in it. I don't know. We really don't know who wrote it, but whoever the author was did a fantastic job of connecting the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and we just call it the Old Covenant, not because it's old, but it was just like the first one, right? So the Old Covenant, and they connect the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, to the New Testament, the New Covenant. And Jewish believers and followers of Jesus in the first century, the book of Hebrews really connected the dots between feasts and the events and the sacrifices of the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and it connected with the New Covenant that Jesus had brought, right? And so it started to make sense for them. They did all these things. If you're a Jewish person back in the first century, you'd grown up doing certain things at certain times of the, because that was just part of your religion and part of your worship. And sometimes you didn't even understand why you did it. You just did it. And what happens in the book of Hebrews is all of this starts to make sense in the life of Jesus. Like all of this was pointing to him. It kind of brings those feasts and those sacrifices of the old covenant. They find their completion and their fulfillment in Jesus, who, by the way, canceled the covenant. And they're like, what do you mean? No, he fulfilled it. read Hebrews a little bit more. The chapter we're going to read, if you read back up a little bit, says he set aside. That actual word is he canceled it. It's no longer binding on you. So everybody's like, yay, that's why we eat bacon and whatever. Yeah, it's true. True. Yes, everyone's like, thank God. There's a little more spiritual stuff than just that, but that's one perk. But in Hebrews 10, in Hebrews, the author of Hebrews is talking about this biblical faith that we have. And then he or she pivots. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. Let me just show you a little bit of this. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19, it starts out this way. Therefore, brothers, sisters, and so some of you, really, I'm going to pause really quick, because some of you, you're new to church or you're new to Cornerstone, and you came in today, you've been here a couple weeks and you're trying to figure things out, and Scott stands up, Brother Scott stands up here, and he says things like, well, Heather, or Brother Heather. That's a different thing. I don't know what I'm saying. Brother Mike or Sister Heather, and you're like, why do they say that? It's kind of contained in here a little bit. It's throughout the scriptures. We're not offended if you don't use that. You don't have to use it, but it's just a term that lets you know, hey, we're family, and the reason we're family is that we have the same Father, that we're believers in Jesus, God Father, and we're family. So just to help you, maybe some of you are like, oh, like for the first time, which is really cool when that happens. But therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence, enter the most holy place. And I know Gentiles, 2018, none of this makes sense. But I'll try to help us out. By the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, open for us through the curtain that is his body. And I know some of you are going, I have no idea what this means. If you were a first-century Jew, this made complete sense. Right? Because it was all about temple worship, and it was about access to God, and the fact that's where you had to go. If you wanted to gain access to God, you went to the temple, and one but the high priest went into where God actually was. Right? So there was this temple, and there were like stages, like there was outside, and then there was courtyard, and then like holy place, and then there was the holy of holies, or the most holy place, where our covenant was contained within it, and it was held behind a curtain, and that's where God kind of dwelt, and that's where the glory of God resided, and the only person that had access to that was the high priest. Do you know how often? Once a year. He went in there. And he better make sure he got his stuff right when he went in there. Because God wasn't playing. And that was their form of worship. That hey, we want to communicate with God, but we have to do it. This guy who only gets access to God once a year. And when he gets access to God, he's got to bring in blood because something had to, because we're really messed up. In a nutshell, right? I know, you're like it's just the sunny version. You're all right. Here it is. Let's keep reading. Oh, by the way, that curtain thing. So there was a curtain that's separate. Back up. Sorry. There was this curtain that separated the holy place from the most holy place. And again, that's where God was. So we have access. But this verse talks about the fact that Jesus, in his body, through his body, provided access, which is such a thing. And so I'm gonna like mess up some people's theology here really quick, but I was going to say to me after service, I have to go get my, call me later, and I'll explain you why this is so important and why this is so vital. See what it says? By a new and living way, he opened for us through, so that separation has been done away with. How do we have access? Through really good. Through being baptized. Through a church attender, church giver. No. His body. That's it. The only way we have access to God is through what Jesus did in his sacrifice. That's it. That's all. No more or less. Can't take away from, right? That's such an important part to understand. Let's keep going here because I'm talking about this birth faith, right? And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near God with a sincere heart, with full assurance that faith brings. Have hearts sprinkled. There again, we're going Old Testament phrasing, right? Hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience. Because some people read that and go, oh, well, I was sprinkled when I was a baby, so we're good. That's not what that's talking about. And I'll explain in a second. And having our bodies washed with pure, oh, I was baptized, so I'm good. This is all about Old Testament ritual. This was all about what they used to do in the temple. And in order for your sins to be covered, something had to die. And that thing shed blood, and that blood would be brought into the Holy of Holies. It would be sprinkled upon the mercy seat, upon the Ark Covenant. It was an indication that, hey, sin has been for, blood has been shed, and it has now been presented to the Father. I know this is all weird kind of stuff, but the idea also with the cleaning of our bodies, or having our bodies washed pure water, doesn't mean you're baptized, you and you're good. It meant that this was all about priests. Priests, in order to enter into the holy place, had to make sure they were completely clean. Here's the thing. The gospel tells us we can't clean ourselves. I can't clean myself up enough to enter into God's presence. So somehow, some way, my sin had to be covered, and I had to be cleansed. I was covered by the blood of Jesus. I'm cleansed by his forgiveness. How that happens. So there's this really cool pictures, but like it's weird. We read words and go, well, and kind of draw these strange conclusions, and that's consistent with what the Bible's teaching us, right? So vertical faith, right? That God's done this for me, Jesus has done this for me. This is how it goes. And this next verse says this: let us hold unswerving. I just picked this version because I like that word. I think that's a sweet word. Like, never use that word. Yeah, it was like, oh, the NIV says unswervingly. That's a cool word. Let us hold swervingly to hope we profess, the confident expectation we firmly grasp. I don't hope one to get to heaven. I know. And it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with Jesus. Right? For he, God, who promises faith, promised what? We're going to get you out of here quick. You can read the rest of chapter 10, actually all of the previous, because it's a letter, and we're kind of breaking in on the letter like 3/4 of the way. But here it is. And in essence, the promise is this. Jesus came to provide the sacrifice and the covering for our sin once and for all. All right? He was doing away that old covenant, that sacrifice, he was doing away with that system. He was doing away with the high priest system. He was doing away with, hey, there's one other guy that you go through before you get God. He was doing away with that system. Canceling it out. Done. Over. No more. Not going to happen any longer. It picture pointing to Jesus anyway. He says, but he came to provide the sacrifice and the covering for us once and for all. When I put my trust in him alone, I am sealed and secured by the Holy Spirit of God. I'm born in God's family, and I now have a living hope, an eternal relationship, and personal access to the Father. I am forever forgiven, and I'm forever his. Hebrews 10, right? That's kind of what it's talking about, all right? Why is that true? Because I'm good? Because he is. Because he's good. He's good Father. But these verses are really talking about a vertical faith. This is all what Jesus did for me and Jesus, me and Jesus, me and Jesus. It's sincere and full assurance. Here's what Jesus did for me. Here's what God will do. The author of Hebrews pivots and tells us what our part is in this faith journey. Now, watch what it says in Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. I'll read in just a second. But in essence, it kind of does this. In essence, based on all that God has done and will do, kind of read that context. Based on all that God has done and will do, what? Let us consider how we may spur one another on to love and good deeds. Not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, encouraging one another. And all more as you see the day, and that the day of Jesus' return approaching, or Jesus' reappearing approaching. So God tells through the pen writer of Hebrews that there is an aspect of our faith that is definitely vertical, that happens vertically. But in order for our faith to really flourish and find real fulfillment and to really make a difference, it has to be lived out horizontally. There's an aspect of our faith that happens vertically. It's a trust in Jesus and who he is and he's done for me. But from that point going forward, in order for my faith to grow, in order for my faith to really find fulfillment, it has to happen. It has to be lived out horizontally. That it's not just about me holding up in a corner and reading the Bible. You know what happens from that? A lot of cults happen from that. Like people read stuff like, well, this is what it says. It says women shouldn't talk in church. I read it. Context, please. But that's what can happen when we're reading our own, right? Things weird happen when we're by ourselves. We need one another. God has designed our lives and our faith to grow when we are othering with one another. He's designed us that way. And some of us are like, well, yeah, but I'm really an introvert. Yeah, but you're not a hermit. There's a difference. I get it. I'm one of those too. I'm kind of like this weird hybrid that like 30% I'm kind of, hey, which I know most of this is caffeine, everybody. So just so you know. But then there's a part of me that's like, okay, it's all good. I'm going to kind of retreat a little bit. But God has designed our lives and our faith to grow when we are one anothering one another. Matter of fact, do you remember worst things God said, Garden of Eden? It's not good that man is alone. It's not good. And we often think about that in the context of marriage, but think about it in any context. It's not good for people to be alone. It's not good for us to be alone. And here's the thing, again, we don't really want another much on Sunday morning for an hour or so. We don't. You come in and we sit. And there's a little bit, if you're in growth groups, some dialogue and some interaction, not to a great deal. I don't get to know about your life a whole lot more. You don't get to know about my life. We kind of jump into the Bible, we dig there. Really one another much on Sunday mornings. The writer of Hebrews tells us, and God tells us, that we need to have access to and accountability with one another. So let me just ask you a couple of quick questions, and I'm not meaning to pry. That's a lie. But here's a couple questions real quick. Just consider this. Who besides your family has access to? And who are you accountable to? And I know a lot of times, well, my family has access. That doesn't count. That's not the one another. It included, but that's not the one anothering that I was really talking about when he talks about one anothering with one another. Right? That's expected. There's all kinds of instruction about family dynamic, and some of those things carry over for sure. We should love one another in our family. You're like, I was hoping that would help, but yeah, it does. But there's some specific instructions just for family, but this one anothering was people on our family. Here's something I know will happen, and I know it because I've done it. You will drift if you are not intentional about spending time with the people of God. You will drift from God if you're not intentional about spending time with the people of God. It happens. It happens. Most of it, maybe there was a season in your life, and I know there was a season in my life. I didn't make a decision to step away from God. Like I wasn't up with God, but you know what? There was a season in my life where I was kind of fed up with church a bit. And I felt like I was justified. And I had all these reasons. And you know what happened? As much as I wanted to believe in God, we're still good, me and God weren't good anymore. Why? Because part of my faith, a great part of my faith, the largest part of my faith, is to be lived out and grown horizontally. And if I'm not doing that, then me and God aren't good anymore. I also know the other thing, and this, I may get some pushback, but that's okay. Hey, be true even as you're sitting in a seat on a Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning. You can live your life as an isolated Christian, and that's a complete misnomer. So the fact that I put those words together, won't walk on. He said we can be isolated Christians. No, I didn't. So please don't say that. That's not true. There's no such thing. Biblically, scripturally, there's no such thing. Practically, there's no such thing. But we can live our lives as isolated Christians while occupying a seat in a church every single Sunday. And the truth is we cannot live out our faith and will not grow in our faith isolation. You know what isolation does? You know what it does? It breeds self-sufficiency. It breeds self-centeredness. Even while we sit on a chair on some mornings, but we don't act with anybody else. We don't do life with anybody else. We kind of hear some stuff, and we hear it, and we look at it, and we receive it through our lens, through our filter, and it typically reinforces all of our negative stuff for whatever reason, and we walk away completely self-centered. That's what isolation does. Even if you're sitting in a seat, if you're not interacting with your brothers and sisters, if you're not doing life with one another, you're not sharing time with one another, you're still as an isolated Christian, and you will walk away with the idea of self-sufficiency and self-centeredness and legalism and elitism and God's gonna get him-ism. It goes there, guys. We have this idea that, well, I've got the truth, and we get this real legalistic idea of, here's the bar, and I'm occupying it. And then that starts to morph into elitism that, well, if you're not here where I am, you're not doing it right. You're not living it out well enough. You're not following Jesus good enough. And then that whole morphs to, well, if you don't see it the way I see it, believe it the way I believe it, one of these days, God's going to get you. Let me just help you understand something. If your theology leaves you angry, you do not have a gospel-based, grace-based, Bible-based theology. Like, if you read the Bible and you're like, God's going to get, like, God's going to get you first, probably. You're messed up. Jonah, right? Read it. God's Jonah the city, like, tell them about grace and repentance and God's love for them. And he does, and then he sits on a hill like, burn them up, God. Like, you know what God did? I'm going to burn them up. Like, I'm going to give you shade, I'm going to take it away, and now you complain about a plan. All these people are like their souls are so much more important than your stupid comfort. Let me just share with you. If your faith makes you feel superior to others and keeps you from doing life and rubbing elbows with others, then you really need to examine your faith. If your faith keeps you from sharing life with one another, from laughing with each other and crying with each other, then you need to examine your faith. Because your faith sounds a lot like the faith of the Pharisees. Here's what I'm finding out. People who believe better than other people have never heard the stories of the other people they think they are better than. I know that's a lot. I couldn't figure out how to make it shorter. But it's true. People who think they're better than other people have never taken the time to lean in and to listen to the stories of the other people they think they're better than. That's why one othering is so important. That's why it's so incredibly important. And again, there isn't much of opportunity to one another a whole lot while sitting in a row on Sunday mornings. That's why for the past few years, and I know you guys are sick of it, but I'll keep saying it until we start doing it consistently. That's why circles are better than rows. This is good. This is needful. This is wonderful that we come together and there's time we spend together. Corporate worship and prayer and teaching and fellowship is great, but it's not all. And they say it's just a small portion of what out our faith is about. And I joke about it, but there's the truth. This is like the pep rally before your week starts, right? This is the, hey, go do life with people and share Jesus with people. Be Jesus to people, right? This is what this is. This isn't life on life. This is like I'm talking and you're tired of hearing it. This is we're hearing stuff. What do we do with it? But we sit in circles and we start to do life face. Now we get to process what we're hearing. And now we get to go, that kind of rubbed me wrong. Which typically happens every week with somebody. That what I said kind of rubs us wrong, right? But we kind of got to wrestle with it, and we have somebody we wrestle it with, and so they can help us see maybe what we're not seeing. When we're sitting in circles, that's when we get to process as we're learning and sort through in very practical ways how to apply God's truth to our lives and then live them out. It's when we're in circles and life together that we get to, as the writer of Hebrews tells us, spur one another on to love and good deeds and encourage one another. And it says, and we're like, yeah, we should do that. You know what the writer of Hebrews said? Just about where we're like, yeah, I believe that. Kind of like the exercise bike. I believe that's for me. And we hang another item of clothing on it. We're like, yeah, I believe that we should spur one another. We should encourage one another. You know what the writer of Hebrews says before we can kind of like move on? He says, and so much more. As you see it approaching, I don't think he was talking at all, or she was talking at all about a Sunday morning worship gathering. That wasn't what they were talking about. They were talking about one another, spurring one another, encouraging one another. What happens outside of these walls oftentimes is much more valuable than what happens inside of them on a regular basis. Loving, encouraging, serving one another. And let me just show you, our camping ministry is just one small but significant way we do that. It's small in the sense of duration. It's not small in the sense of prep, and it's a big undertaking. But it's small in the sense of duration. It's one small but significant way we do that. You know why I know it's true? Because I hear it as we're leaving camp yesterday, of all people with a smile on their faces, and some of them hard to smile because they're so sick and tired. But still, there's camp tired, and there's this joy. You know what it came from? It wasn't from all these necessary individual items. It was the one anothering with one another. That's what it was. I'm convinced that if you went through all the same paces, 3 straight days on your own, you wouldn't be nearly as uplifted. Matter of fact, I dare you probably come back a bit empty, kind of lonely. Another great way happens, this one anothering, and you heard it already this morning, is in and through our lives. So at the close of our service today, every single adult will have the opportunity to sign up, try out, and hopefully plug into one of several life groups that will be launching mid-September. And I know you're like, oh, we've already heard the spiel. Let me just bear with me for a couple minutes. I want you to consider this, okay? If any of the descriptions fit your life and where you're at right now, all right? So just consider it. I'm not taking names and check, see if you're doing this or anything. I just want you to consider it. Please consider this. If any of these descriptions fit where you're at, I'd like you to consider setting up, trying out a group. If you're not a believer, you're welcome. Matter of fact, you're more than welcome to sign up and join a life group because maybe you have questions. And like if you've been to church at all, or maybe this is just your first time in church or back to church for a while, like in this environment, you don't get, wait a second, hang on, I have a question about Jesus. And I guess you could do it, I'd answer it. But it's a little different. It's typically we're just kind of sharing and wanting you to take it with you. But maybe you're unsure, maybe you have questions. That's a great environment where a lot of questions can be asked, answers can be given from the Bible. So if you're not a believer, that's a great environment for you to learn or find out some answers. Maybe you're a new believer. And by that I mean you've made a decision to accept Jesus as Savior within the last few days, weeks, months, maybe even, I would say even within the last 5 years. But there are opportunities to begin and to have life on life discipleship. Like you get to somebody who's maybe a little further along in their journey, and they can kind of help you understand some things they're kind of struggling with, wrestling with, or whatever it may be. If you're a mature believer, meaning you've been saved for some time, you're still leaning in and learning, and you want to figure out, hey, how to live this faith out in a way that makes a difference in the lives of others and in my own. That like, how do I do this where it really gets excited, for me, and hopefully it's contagious just for somebody else. There's opportunities in our life groups for iron to sharpen iron. That you probably meet somebody and connect with somebody where they who kind of with their direction and your decisions, they help you give a whole lens through which to kind of see these things and then kind of come into practice, and then it's somebody you can check back with and hey, how did that go? I know we've been praying about you and your marriage, or you and your family, or you and whatever your job. How are you doing? And those things that you're gaining from God's word, and you're like, yeah, I believe that. How are those things working out as you come into practice, right? Because Jesus said, hey, blessed person that not only hears what I've said, but does it. His most famous sermon, and that he probably one of the most famous he ever preached, is Matthew, and it starts in chapter 5 and it finishes up in chapter 7. And at the end of this, his closing, he's landing the plane, which is always the big deal. They told us in sermonizing class, hey, start well, finish well. People won't remember what's in the anyway. And so okay, you try to remember that. Jesus' landing was, there was a wise man and a foolish man. And they built their houses. And one built them on the sand. The foolish man built it on the sand, and the storms of life hit his house. But the wise man also built his house, but he found it on the rock. He dug deep, and he fastened to the truths of who Jesus is and the words is. And when the storms of life, his life, that house sustained. Stayed in place. But it says that foolish man, it says that house crashed. And great fall. The idea was that not only did the house fall, they took others with it. And let me just share with mom and dad. Kids, you're cool right now, but mom and dad, if your faith founded on Jesus and isn't strong, your kids are collateral damages. All right? It goes beyond it, ripples out. But at the end of that story, Jesus says, blessed person who not only hears what I've said, but puts it into practice. Right? So maybe that's where you're at. If you're a maturing believer, you're like, hey, I want to figure out, I'm understanding what it says. I just want to learn how to put this into practice better and live my life authentically and genuinely. So we have a not a believer, a new believer, a unbeliever. I wanted to stay at the ends. That's just the way I am. So a musty believer. You come to a place where you've heard it all, seen it all, know it all, maybe too busy for it all, or even bored with it all. I would challenge you with this. Perhaps with your incredible wisdom and a large dose of humility, you could help the rest of us figure out how this works. Because one another is really important. Because one another only helps not just the other, but us as well. You see, our Father is all about relationships, and He has designed us to live our very best lives in relationship with Him. But He also told us that our relationship with Him is only as strong as our relationship is with others. And if that's not strong, I know you don't like this because you're like, I'm really so busy. I read a quote the other day that said, if Satan can make you bad, he'll make you good. What he wants to do is what he's always tried to do. He wants to pull away from relationships that will move you in the direction of God. It's what he's about. It's what he's always about. So we're going to wrap up. I want to share something with you really quick that hit me late Friday night, and then we're closing. Brother Scott walked us through our devotional that evening as we talked a bit about the joy that Paul and Silas experienced, even while in prison. And joy not only permeated those two men, but it penetrated even the lives of the other prisoners and that prison guard. You have to read that story. And then Brother Scott took us over to John 15, and we read and discussed some verses there. And let me just share with you, this is where Jesus is within just hours of being crucified, right? He's with his church, his disciples, his small ecclesia at that time, that small gathering of people that he had called out, and they had followed him and committed to him. They've been walking with him for 3.5 years, and he's giving them some last lessons that he hopes will last. And so he does this, and he's hoping these very last words, these last things are going to just really connect and sit with them, and they're going to carry these on as the church continues to grow and thrive and flourish. Here's what he says in John 15, verses 9 and 10. He says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me, which is powerful. Because there was just such synchronization with those guys, with the Father and the Son. He says, I've loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love. Let me just help you with the Greek here a little bit. The order in which this is written is opposite in which it was meant, if that makes any sense. So in our language, I would say, I'm looking outside and I see a red car. In Greek language, oftentimes the noun would come first and the descriptor come after. It would be the car red. So a lot of times we read verses and we go, well, what he's saying is that if I follow his commandments, that's the only way I'm going to stay loved. No. What he's saying is if you're staying loved, if you're remaining loved and in love, you're going to follow my commandments. There's a cause and effect. There's kind of this idea of what's happening here. So when you obey my commands, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. Meaning what? If Jesus disobeyed, the Father wouldn't love him anymore? No, just the opposite. He says, I live these things out because I love my dad. That's what he's trying to tell us. So real love, abiding love, secure love, results in trust and obedience and some following. That's what he's trying to have us understand. But he says this. Jesus continues. He says, I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. How many of you want more joy? Real quick. And we're going to get out of here. How many would just want to get out of here? We'll do that. That's my daughter raised her hand. That's awesome. So here's what's happened. We're going to just dismiss in a minute. You stay put. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. I care less about your joy. No, I'm just joking. But he says, I told you these things because I want you to have all of my joy in you. And when that happens, your joy is going to overflow. You're going to be filled with joy. We kind of stopped there. We hung out there Friday night and talked about God's desire for us and the joyful life he desperately wants for us. But let me share with you, the next verse is a game changer. The next verse changes everything, because in the very next verse, Jesus tells what the command is, right? So we're like, we want joy. Yes, we do. We want joy. How about you? We want joy. We want God's joy in us. And he said, if you follow my commands, you're going to have this, my joy, and you're going to have this overflowing. And we're like, okay, Jesus, lay it on us. What's the command? So you guys ready for this? Are you ready? Because we're in church, we're talking about commandments. So everybody have a list of paper ready to make a long list of things that you have to do in order to have God's joy? That's what we typically think. Here's what Jesus says. Here's my commandment. Love one another. In the same way that I love you. That's it. Well, if I read the Old Testament, there's 600. Yeah, I canceled that. You can keep reading it. There's good stuff, good moral principles, but it's not binding on you. Yeah, but you said that I'm supposed to love the Lord my God with all my heart, my soul, my mind, and love my neighbor as myself. Well, the first one, he says, yeah, you can't do the first one if you're not in that one. It's that. Love one another. He says, in the same way I've loved you. How does Jesus love us? Unconditionally, as we talked about this past week, personally. He didn't just lump us in a big group. He sought out me. That just blows me away because I know me. If you didn't believe in grace, just talk with me for a while. God's gracious. He loves us lavishly. We read that verse. What love Father has lavished on us. He loved us sacrificially. And as Chris reminded us, Brother Chris reminded us this past week, he loved us recklessly. He didn't care about his reputation. He didn't care that his son would be hung in a place of shame. He wanted us to know that he loved us. God has demonstrated his own love for us, that while we were screwed up sinners, Jesus died for us. He says, love each other like that. Love one another. Why? Because I want the world to know what my love looks like. Convinced, again, after the last few days at camp, that we love best. We move out of our rows, we move out of our ruts and routine, and we move into real community and real relationships with one another. I'm convinced of it. We are at our best. I'm at my best. You are at your best. Cornerstone is at its best when we are loving others like Jesus and we are loving to Jesus. It's true. Let me leave you with this charge, this challenge, and hope this encouragement. It's similar to the charge and challenge Apostle Paul shared with the church in Thessalonica. I'm going to put my spin on it. But in essence, Paul told them this. keep one anothering one another. Keep one anothering one another. Oh, and I'll add a footnote. Go sign a life group. All right, let me pray for you. Father God, thanks so much for helping us understand just the importance of relationship. Not because you want us to just fill our time with something else, but you have so much more for us in and through those relationships. The iron sharpening iron. Those that have been comforted, being able to comfort others, all these things that you walk us through, you teach us through, and we have this opportunity to learn with and learn from one another. And God, we're better for it. And this community is better for it. And this world is better for it. Help us see that isolated Christians don't exist. Not in your kingdom perspective. Help us understand that. I will drift from God. I don't intentionally spend time with people of God. Help me to remember that, understand that. Maybe take somebody's word for that and not put it to the test and find ourselves in a place we don't want to be. God, thank you so much for the greatest relationship you've ever extended, and that was the one with you through your son Jesus. Thank you for loving us so much that while we could not approach you, you approached us with love and grace. And you gave up your son's life to meet a whole standard that we can now hang on to, ride in on the coattails of Jesus Christ and say, we're here in the presence of Almighty God because Jesus, we could because we believe on him. Just help us understand that. It's nothing about what we do, fail to do, forget to do, but it's all about what Jesus has done for us. Let us grow in that. Let us grow in the grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior. Lord, I pray today if there's somebody here that doesn't know your son and as Savior, that today would be that day that they take that, find out that next step, understanding that, and that they understand that vertical part of their faith is so important, it's so crucial. But then there's this incredible thing that happens. Step through that door, as we step through that curtain, and we step into your presence, that we find that there's others that you want us to one another with. And you've designed this incredible thing called local churches for us to dis and to strengthen each other and to sharpen each other. Relationships make us better. And hope it makes others around us better as well. Go with us as we place. Give us a successful afternoon if we have things to do, or restful afternoon, whatever it may be. Just keep this before us. Help us this week.